President Lee Jae-myung on Tuesday ordered relevant ministries to use all their available resources to ensure the return of South Korean nationals kidnapped in Cambodia after responding to scam job offers, following the torture and death of a South Korean college student in the Southeast Asian country. Unification Minister Chung Dong-young has hinted at the possibility of a North Korea-U.S. summit during the upcoming APEC leaders meeting in Gyeongju later this month, citing the inter-Korean tourist village Panmunjeom as a potential venue. Samsung Electronics estimated its third quarter operating profit as the highest in more than 3 years, driven by a rebound in memory chip prices and increased sales of high-bandwidth memory products. In addition, the country's overall ICT exports came in at a record high for the month of September. We begin with the latest on an investigation into the recent job scams in Cambodia targeting Koreans. While the government is stepping up efforts to combat the string of crimes, President Lee Jae-myung called for a swift coordination with the local authorities there and tighter travel restrictions. Our presidential office correspondent Yoon Jung-min reports.
With growing calls to tackle a recent crime surge in Cambodia targeting Koreans, President Lee Jae-myung began the weekly cabinet meeting by urging the prompt return of kidnapped Koreans who had been caught up in job scams.
국민의 생명과 안전을 지키는 것이 정부의 가장 큰 책임입니다. 지금은 다른 무엇보다 피해자들을 보호하고 또 사건 연루자들을 국내로 신속하게 송환해야 됩니다.
He called for the need to speed up establishing a coordination system with the Cambodian authorities, strengthening travel restrictions for areas of concern, and securing a sufficient budget for consular services.
가용 자원을 총동원해서 신속하게, 정확하게, 확실하게 대응해 주시기 바랍니다.
This follows an increase in reported kidnappings of Koreans by criminal rings in Cambodia through job scams, often related to voice phishing, and the recent torture death of a Korean college student by a local organized crime gang.
The second Vice Foreign Minister will lead a joint governmental response team and will be sent to Cambodia on the 15th. Also, an international cooperative body will be launched to carry out a joint police operation on the kidnapping and confinement of our people.
On the economy, President Lee urged that all hands should be on deck in the face of intensifying global trade conflict, stressing the need for gaining a technological edge and diversifying export markets. He also called for strict measures to straighten out distortions in the domestic real estate market caused by disinformation. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
Also on Tuesday, President Lee Jae-myung called for the need to help small business owners write off heavy debts so that they can recover from the fallout from the COVID-19 pandemic.
우리는 한 번 빚지면 죽을 때까지 쫓아다니잖아요. 그래서 사회적으로 사실은 바람직하지 않아요.
He was speaking at the Digital Talk Live in Seoul today, a town hall-style event where more than 100 citizens were invited. He suggested a reformist approach on financial policy, adding that there is much room for adjustment when it comes to policy measures. Noting that the businesses were affected by pandemic-era lockdowns and restrictions, the president stressed the role of the government to help those debt-ridden people. Now, on to day 2 of the National Assembly's very first audit of the Lee Jae-myung administration. The Unification Minister shared his views on issues regarding North Korea, including the possibility of a summit between Pyongyang and Washington. Our Kim Bo-kyung tells us more.
On the second day of the parliamentary audit of President Lee's government, Unification Minister Chung Dong-young stated that there is a possibility of a North Korea-U.S. summit on the sidelines of the upcoming APEC leaders meeting. The remarks were made when responding to a lawmaker's question at a Foreign Affairs Committee meeting, where the minister said he strongly hopes a summit takes place, and that if it does happen, it would likely take place in Panmunjeom, Truce Village in Paju City. When it comes to how Seoul will deal with Pyongyang, the minister reaffirmed the End Initiative, exchange, normalization, and denuclearization that was put forward by President Lee during his address at the UN General Assembly last month. Based on this vision, Chung added that Seoul will end hostility and pursue dialogue with the North. When it comes to acknowledging South and North Korea as two separate states, the minister underlined how recognizing the two Koreas as such does not mean accepting permanent division, and rather it is the key to opening the door to unification. He added that the government is to officially confirm the idea soon. Meanwhile, Joint Chiefs of Staff was also grilled by Defense Committee lawmakers, where its chairman, General Jin Young-sing, apologized for the army having participated in former President Yoon Suk-yeol's botched martial law attempt. He mentioned North Korea's recent military parade where the regime showcased its latest Hwasong-20 intercontinental ballistic missile under development and vowed for a firm readiness posture against Pyongyang.
The Joint Chiefs of Staff are doing their utmost to establish a strong and ready military posture that can respond to any threat immediately, while also focusing all efforts on transforming into a smart elite force that can win on future battlefields.
The JCS added that it is seeking to hold a South Korea-U.S. military committee meeting attended by top military officers in Seoul early next month. These usually take place ahead of the Security Consultative Meeting, an annual meeting of the defense chiefs of the two countries. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
So the Lee Jae-myung administration's first National Assembly audit began on Monday, setting the stage for 3 weeks of government-wide accountability checks. The 3-week review will cover everything from judicial rulings to economic and cultural policies, with lawmakers closely questioning top officials on their decisions and performance. Our Moon Hae-ryun joins me in the studio to tell us more. Welcome back, Hae-ryun.
Good evening, Tammy.
So Hae-ryun, walk us through the whole audit process and do give us a recap on the first day yesterday.
Right, so the National Assembly is essentially a major annual review of how the government and public institutions have been performing, and relevant top officials report on and answer questions about their performance. This year's audit, starting Monday, has 17 committees reviewing over 800 government agencies and is the first under the Lee Jae-myung administration, opening with sharp clashes between the ruling Democratic Party and the main opposition People Power Party. At the Judiciary Committee on Monday, Supreme Court Chief Justice To Lee faced intense questioning from the DP over a ruling finding President Lee guilty of false claims during his presidential election campaign in 2022, while PPP lawmakers call the session politically motivated. Cho warns that summoning judges to testify about their rulings threatens the court's independence.
If judges are made to testify about their rulings simply because they presided over a certain case, it could discourage them from making judgments based on the Constitution, the law, and their conscience, and even lead to decisions swayed by outside pressures.
Meanwhile, economic ministries were also under scrutiny. Trade Minister Kim Jong-un warns that Korea's export dependence on a few countries leaves it vulnerable, pledging to diversify markets and boost ties with the U.S., China, and Japan. Finance Minister Koo Yoon-chol said Seoul must quickly wrap up tariff talks with Washington and confirmed plans to meet with U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent this week.
So Hae-ryun, no surprise, bipartisan tensions were high yesterday. Now, what can you tell us about today's audit, on top of the audit on Unification Minister that our Bo-kyung reported in the previous report?
Right, so the second day of parliamentary audits also saw heated partisan debate in the Science, ICT, Broadcasting and Communications Committee over the fate of the Korea Communications Commission and the arrest of its former chief, Lee Jin-suk. The DP argued that abolishing the KCC, which they claimed had been used as a tool for media control by the Yoon Suk-yeol administration over the past 3 years was only natural and called for accountability from its staff. Meanwhile, the PPP protested, saying that the creation of a new commission to replace it symbolizes the Democratic Party's parliamentary dictatorship and shows its unilateral handling of legislation. In addition, the Culture, Sports and Tourism Committee also held its audit today. Minister Choi Hee-young highlighted concerns over slowing growth in Korea's cultural industries, stressing the need for active investment.
We must develop K-culture into a future growth industry worth over 300 trillion Korean won and strengthen the cultural and artistic ecosystem that forms its foundation.
The minister also pointed to tourism and AI-driven content as key areas for policy innovation, showing that economic and cultural agendas are closely linked in these audits.
Now, Hae-ryun, that's just 2 days into the audit. So what can we expect in the weeks to come, more than 2 weeks?
Right, so the National Assembly will actually be taking its audits overseas to Cambodia, and this comes following crimes against South Korean nationals, including the kidnapping and killing of a university student by a local gang. And the Foreign Affairs and Unification Committee will conduct an on-site inspection next Wednesday. It aims to review the status of crimes targeting Koreans in Southeast Asia, with the DP and the PPP again clashing over who is to blame for the crime. The DP says that crimes have surged over the past 2 years, while the previous embassy and foreign ministry failed to act, while the PPP argued the ambassador post was vacant at the time, blaming the current administration. And beyond the audits, the two parties have agreed to hold a plenary session on October 26th to process 70 livelihood-related bills, including measures to prevent emergency room turnaways and support childcare centers in remote areas. The session was set for a Sunday to avoid overlapping with ongoing audits, and both parties have pledged cooperation to ensure the swift passage of these pending bills.
Hae-ryun, a lot to be covered in the coming weeks. So thank you so much for coming in tonight.
Thank you for having me.
Samsung Electronics' third quarter earnings exceeded market expectations by 17%. That figure is the highest in 3 years, and analysts expect the positive trend to continue. Our Kim Do-yeon has this report.
South Korea's largest company by market cap, Samsung Electronics, has released preliminary quarterly earnings that have significantly surpassed market forecasts. The company announced on Tuesday its preliminary earnings for the third quarter of 2025, posting an operating profit of 12.1 trillion Korean won, or $8.47 billion on sales of 86 trillion won, or $60.23 billion. These figures represent a quarter-on-quarter increase of 158.55% for operating profit, while sales saw a jump of 15.33%. Year-on-year, the increase is 31.8% for operating profit and 8.72% for sales. The operating profit exceeded the market consensus of approximately 10 trillion won by more than 17%. The 12.1 trillion won operating profit is the company's highest since the second quarter of 2022. The 86 trillion won in sales marks a record for any quarter, and it's the first time the company's quarterly revenue has surpassed the 80 trillion won threshold. The previous record for sales was 79.1 trillion won, set in the third quarter of 2024. According to an expert, the strong performance is driven by a combination of factors, with the trend likely to continue into next year.
The improved performance is due to 3 things: strong sales in AI-related memory, a surge in prices for legacy products due to supply shortages, and reduced deficits in the foundry and system LSI divisions. I expect this boom to continue through the fourth quarter.
The better-than-expected performance was reflected in the company's stock price, with shares reaching a new 52-week high of 96,000 won during intraday trading on Tuesday. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
And the strong performances of local semiconductors were also clearly evident in South Korea's ICT export figures last month, which turned out to be a record high as well. Our correspondent Panmunjeom has the details.
Despite uncertainties in the global trade environment, South Korea saw an all-time high performance in the ICT sector last month. According to the Ministry of Science and ICT and the Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy on Tuesday, ICT exports for the month totaled $25.43 billion, a 14% increase from the same month last year. This resulted in a trade surplus of $11.65 billion. Outbound shipments of semiconductors, one of the country's main export engines, recorded $16.62 billion in exports. This also marked an all-time high for the second consecutive month. Exports of telecommunications equipment, which rose over 38%, and displays also contributed to this upward trend, driven by strong OLED demand. The strong performance was largely credited to the semiconductor industry thanks to higher memory chip prices amid growing demands for AI servers.
It seems the significant rise in DRAM prices played a role in this upward trend. Given the continuous strength of the semiconductor market itself, we can expect continued strong performance in Q4 as well.
Despite this upward trend, due to the tariff situation, exports to the U.S. decreased, marking it as the only region to do so, while others experienced gains. Shipments to Taiwan recorded the most significant surge, primarily fueled by a substantial rise in semiconductor exports, while other major markets, including China, Vietnam, the European Union, and Japan, also saw increased exports. Meanwhile, imports totaled $13.78 billion, resulting in a positive ICT trade balance, the second highest figure on record. Munjeom, Arirang News.
U.S. President Donald Trump on Monday touted the Gaza ceasefire deal, saying that it has opened the door to rebuilding. Now, the comments came during a summit of world leaders in Egypt as the last of the Israeli hostages were returned to their families. Our Park Kwon-woo tells us more.
U.S. President Donald Trump attended a major summit of world leaders in Egypt on Monday, where he said the Gaza ceasefire deal has opened the door to rebuilding.
And now the rebuilding begins. The rebuilding is maybe going to be the easiest part. I think we've done a lot of the hardest part because the rest comes together. We all know how to rebuild.
The comments came as Trump arrived for the high-level gathering, which brought together more than 20 heads of state. At the peace summit in Egypt, U.S. President Donald Trump, along with the leaders of Egypt, Qatar, and Turkey, signed a document finalizing a peace plan for Gaza. However, with key details undisclosed and a plan not signed by Israel or Hamas, it remains limited in scope. The ceasefire agreed last week halted Israel's massive offensive on Gaza City, which had killed tens of people daily. Under the terms of the deal, Hamas released the final 20 living Israeli hostages, while Israel freed more than 1,900 Palestinian prisoners. The bodies of 28 deceased hostages were also expected to be returned as part of the deal. However, as only 4 were handed over to the Red Cross on Monday, Israel's defense minister called it a failure to meet commitments of the agreement, adding that it will be responded to accordingly. And as the second phase, including the disarmament of Hamas and withdrawal of Israel from Gaza, has yet to be agreed upon, eyes are on whether Israel and Hamas can reach a comprehensive deal while narrowing their differences and ultimately achieve lasting peace. Park Kwon-woo, Arirang News.
Despite a recent and bumpy mood between the U.S. and China over trade issues, Washington is keeping its dialogue open with Beijing. The U.S. Treasury Chief says President Trump's planned meeting with China's Xi Jinping in South Korea signals easing tensions between the two sides. Our Pyongyang has more.
U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent says a meeting between President Donald Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping in South Korea is still on track. In an interview with Fox Business on Monday, Bessent said there were substantial communications between the two sides over the weekend, adding that U.S.-China relations have substantially de-escalated. He noted that both sides will hold additional working-level meetings this week on the sidelines of the IMF and World Bank gatherings. His comments come as both countries move to cool tensions that flared after Washington announced a potential 100% tariff on Chinese imports and Beijing tightened controls on rare earth exports.
It was a miscalculation, but we are communicating now. I am confident that we can move forward.
Bessent additionally stated that President Trump has made clear the tariffs will not take effect until November 1st, signaling that the U.S. is leaving room for diplomatic progress. He sharply criticized China's export restrictions, saying they would affect the whole world and that China has pointed a bazooka at the supply chain and industrial base of the entire free world. The Treasury chief said the U.S. is prepared to assert its sovereignty in a variety of ways, noting that Washington is already in close contact with its allies in Europe, India, and democratic nations across Asia. He expressed optimism that Beijing remains open to talks, but warned that if not, Washington holds significant leverage to respond with equally strong or stronger countermeasures. Panmunjeom, Arirang News.
It will be hard to see the blue autumn skies all week. Rain is expected to be frequent this week. In eastern parts of Gangwon-do province and east coast of Gyeongsang-buk-do province, 5 to 20 millimeters of rain will fall until tonight, and about 5 millimeters more is in southern parts of the country. The daytime temperature rose higher than yesterday. It rose to 21 degrees Celsius in Seoul, which is about 3 degrees higher than yesterday, showing typical autumn weather for this time of year. However, strong winds continue around the coastal areas of the Gyeongsang-do provinces, and a high wave advisories is also in place around the east coast. Please take extra precautions. Seoul will start off at 16 degrees tomorrow morning, Busan at 20 degrees. Highs will go up to 23 to 27 degrees across the country. Rain is back again tomorrow nationwide and will continue until Saturday. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
That is all we have for tonight. I'm Kim Dami. From all of us here at Arirang, thanks for watching and good night.